I had a successful career as a plastic surgeon, lots of money and a beautiful wife, but lost everything in an accident. I never thought I'd become the guy who fixes noses for a living, but here I am, Jake Collins, 30-year-old plastic surgeon in Los Angeles, where each nose job costs more than my entire education. My life looks perfect on Instagram. A sprawling villa in Beverly Hills with an ocean view, a beautiful influencer wife, and a garage full of German engineering. But something's off, like I'm wearing someone else's skin. This morning started like any other. I woke up at 5:30 a.m., did my workout in our home gym overlooking the Hollywood Hills, then drove my Porsche through traffic while listening to a podcast about investment strategies. Just another day in paradise, right? Except I couldn't stop thinking about that letter from Pops that arrived yesterday. Let me back up a bit. I grew up with doctor parents. Dad's a cardiologist, mom's a neurologist, who had my life mapped out before I could even spell stethoscope. They pushed me toward medicine with the subtle pressure of two people who believed farming was for losers and medicine was for winners. Their words, not mine. And like any good son desperate for approval, I bought into it. The irony? Some of my happiest memories were spent far away from their sterile Upper East Side apartment on my grandfather's honey farm in Kentucky's Bluegrass Valley. Pops was everything my parents weren't. Callous hands, weathered face, and a laugh that rumbled up from his belly. Every summer until I was 18, I'd escaped to his world of rolling hills, wildflowers, and beehives humming with life. Pops taught me everything about beekeeping. Bees are like people, he'd say, while showing me how to check the hives. They work together, but each one has its own story. Then he'd cut me a piece of honeycomb, fresh and dripping with summer-scented honey. Nothing in my Beverly Hills kitchen has ever tasted that good. I met Emma there. She was a girl from the neighboring farm with sun-kissed skin and a smile bright as a Kentucky morning. We walked through meadows, laugh about nothing, and eat apples straight from the tree. First love stuff, you know? Pure and simple. Sometimes I wonder what happened to her. Actually, I know what happened. I left and she stayed. Med school, career, Los Angeles. It all pulled me away from Kentucky like a powerful riptide. Now I spend my days reshaping noses for Hollywood stars and wealthy housewives. My wife, Lauren, with her perfect makeup and equally perfect demands, spends my money faster than I make it. Just last week, she cornered me after breakfast, batting those Instagram-famous eyelashes, telling me we absolutely needed a new Tesla because the old one, 9 months old, was so last season. I smiled, nodded, but something inside me cracked a little more. The worst part? I'm good at this life. Really good. My hands are steady, my eye for facial symmetry nearly perfect. Celebrities request me by name. I'm the guy who makes the already beautiful people of L.A. look even more beautiful. It's absurd, but it pays for the lifestyle Lauren expects. Every evening, I'm stuck in traffic on the 405 freeway, surrounded by angry drivers and exhaust fumes. That's when the memories hit hardest. The clean Kentucky air, Pop's weathered hands, showing me how to smoke the bees to calm them down, the taste of honeycomb on a hot summer day. In those moments, I wonder if I made a terrible mistake. Lauren doesn't understand. How could she? She grew up in Newport Beach with a plastic surgeon father, who gave her first nose job at 16. Her world has always been about appearance, status, and having the right address. The concept of finding joy in something as simple as watching bees collect pollen would baffle her perfectly contoured mind. My parents aren't much better. During our monthly dinner last weekend, Dad asked about my celebrity client list, while Mom reminded me about the conference in Zurich I simply must attend. I mentioned Pops once, just once, and the exchange that look parents give when they think their child is regressing. Mom quickly changed the subject to her latest research publication. Yesterday, I performed a rhinoplasty on a TV actress who brought in a picture of Jennifer Lawrence. "I want this nose," she said, as if ordering from a menu. 2 hours later, I gave her what she wanted, a slightly improved version of what she already had. She'll be happy for a few months, then find something else to fix. That's how it works in my world. After surgery, I found a letter from Pops in my office mailbox. His handwriting looked shakier than I remembered. "You need to remember who you are, boy. Come visit." Just like that. No small talk, no questions about my fancy doctor life. Just an invitation home. I stood by my office window, watching the LA lights twinkle below. In the distance, the Pacific Ocean stretched out, vast and empty. I thought about my schedule. 3 surgeries tomorrow, a consultation with a reality TV star, a charity gala where Lauren would parade me around like her latest accessory. Could I really drop everything and go to Kentucky? The thing about honey is that it never goes bad. Archaeologists have found pots of honey in ancient Egyptian tombs, still perfectly good after thousands of years. Maybe memories are like that too, preserved and waiting for you to come back and taste them again. I pulled out my phone to check flights to Louisville. Just checking, I told myself. Just curious. But my heart was beating to the rhythm of buzzing bees, and for the first time in months, I felt something like hope. Later that night, Lauren was scrolling through her phone while I stared at the ceiling of our master bedroom. "Honey," she said without looking up, "we need to RSVP to the Andersons' yacht party next weekend." I nodded automatically, but my mind was 1,000 miles away, wandering through fields of clover with Pops. What if I just went? What if I called my office manager, rescheduled my appointments, and caught the next flight to Kentucky? What would happen to Dr. Jake Collins, Beverly Hills' favorite nose sculptor? Would the world stop turning? Or would it finally start turning the right way? I fell asleep dreaming of honey farms and woke up to Lauren's alarm and the smell of her expensive perfume. Another day in paradise. Except now I had a choice to make. Stay in my golden cage or fly back to where my heart might still remember how to beat properly. I never expected that fate had other plans for me. Plans that would turn my perfectly curated life upside down before I could even make that choice. Sometimes the universe doesn't wait for you to decide. It decides for you. As I dressed for work that morning, I still didn't know if I'd ever see Pops again, or if I'd ever escape this glittering hell I'd built for myself. But the letter sat on my nightstand, a beacon calling me home to a place where honey flowed and life made sense. Could I find the courage to answer? I remember that evening like it was playing in slow motion. The decision about visiting Pops was still bouncing around my head as I left the clinic. My last patient had been a C-list actor wanting a jawline like Chris Hemsworth. I'd told him what I tell everyone, that I could enhance his natural features, not transform him into someone else. He'd been disappointed, but signed consent forms anyway. The California sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink as I pulled my Porsche onto Sunset Boulevard. Traffic was light for once, and I thought maybe I could get home early, book a flight to Kentucky before Lauren returned from her photo shoot in Malibu. I was scrolling through flight options at a red light when it turned green. I pulled forward, still half focused on my phone. That's when it happened. A pickup truck blew through the intersection, the driver's face a blur behind the windshield. I heard screeching tires, saw headlights, and then impact. My car spun like a carnival ride. Airbags exploded in my face, and glass shattered in a terrible symphony. Everything went sideways, then upside down. In that suspended moment between life as I knew it and whatever came next, a single thought floated through my mind. Why didn't I call Pops back? Not my patients, not Lauren, not my parents. Just my grandfather and his honey farm. I woke up to fluorescent lights and the antiseptic smell of a hospital. A doctor, not from my social circle, thank God, stood over me with a clipboard. The diagnosis wasn't pretty. Broken arm, leg trauma, mild concussion. But what terrified me most was when I tried to reach for the water cup and saw my hands trembling like autumn leaves. The neurologist spoke in that careful doctor tone I recognized all too well. Stress, trauma, possible nerve damage. Might resolve in time. Might not. I nodded as if I was just another patient. But inside I was screaming. My hands were my fortune. My identity. Without steady hands, what kind of plastic surgeon would I be? The next few days passed in a blur of pain meds, visitors, and Lauren's designer perfume wafting over my hospital bed. She played the dutiful wife perfectly. Instagram posted her holding my hand, the one not in a cast, with captions about standing by her man through tough times. The lighting was always perfect. She brought her ring light to the hospital, When I got home, Lauren surprised me by actually being helpful. She made me smoothies, fluffed my pillows, and even postponed a sponsored trip to the Maldives. For about a week, I thought maybe our marriage was more than a business arrangement after all. Maybe this accident would bring us closer. Then reality set in. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Not when I was resting, not when I was focused. I dropped a glass of water trying to drink, and Lauren's expression shifted from concern to something uglier. That night, I heard her on the phone with her friend, whispering about how long my recovery might take, wondering if I'd ever operate again. By the end of the first month, her patience had worn thinner than the surgical gloves I used to wear. She stood in our bedroom doorway one morning, perfectly made up despite the early hour. I'll never forget what she said, that she needed a husband, not a burden, that she hadn't signed up for this. The way she looked at me, like I was a Gucci bag that had gotten ruined in the rain. I couldn't blame her entirely. Our relationship had always been transactional, my status and income for her beauty and social connections. I'd known what I was signing up for, but facing it so starkly when I was down made me realize how hollow our life together really was. The clinic put me on indefinite leave. My partners were sympathetic, but realistic. No one wanted a plastic surgeon with shaky hands. My malpractice insurance would skyrocket if I even attempted to operate. Just like that, I went from being Beverly Hills golden boy to a cautionary tale. I spent days staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'd ended up here. I'd followed the script my parents wrote. Prestigious medical school, lucrative specialty, trophy wife, mansion with an ocean view. I was supposed to be happy. Instead, I couldn't even hold a spoon steady enough to eat soup without spilling. Then came the call that shattered what was left of my world. Pops had died in his sleep. Peaceful, they said, but that didn't ease the crushing weight of guilt. I'd never called him back, never visited. Now he was gone, and all I had was that last letter and a lifetime of summers that seemed increasingly like someone else's memories. The funeral was small, just local folks from Kentucky who'd known him for decades. I flew in alone. Lauren had a cosmetics launch she couldn't possibly miss. My parents sent flowers, but stayed in New York. Standing by his grave, listening to people tell stories about the man who taught me everything important in life, I felt like an imposter. These people had been there for him. I'd been chasing superficial success 3,000 miles away. After the service, a lawyer approached me with news I hadn't expected. Pops had left me the farm. All of it. The house, the land, the abandoned beehives. Everything. I sat in his dusty office trying to process what this meant while the lawyer explained property taxes and transfer of deed. When I told Lauren about the inheritance, her eyes lit up for the first time since my accident, not with joy for me or respect for Pops, but with dollar signs. She started talking about selling the dump immediately, how we could buy a yacht, maybe a vacation home in Aspen. The market for rural properties was up. She'd heard. That night, lying in our king-size bed that suddenly felt as vast as a Grand Canyon, I remembered something Pops told me when I was 16. Money is like beeswax, he'd said, useful, but without soul, it's worthless. Lauren's plans for the farm money felt soulless in a way I couldn't articulate. The next morning, I told her I wouldn't sell the farm. She stared at me like I'd grown a second head. We argued, our first real fight that wasn't about interior decorating or vacation destinations. She called me stubborn. I called her materialistic. The truth about our marriage spilled out between us like wine on white carpet. Impossible to clean up. A week later, she moved out. 3 weeks after that, her lawyer contacted mine about divorce proceedings. She was dating a Wall Street banker now, someone whose hands didn't shake, whose future was secure. Her parting words still echo sometimes. She married success, not failure. My parents were nearly as disappointed. They flew in from New York, sat in my half-empty living room. Lauren had taken her furniture, and suggested I sell the farm and invest in a tech startup, something to get back on my feet in Los Angeles. They couldn't understand why I'd want to hold onto a dilapidated honey farm in Kentucky. How could I explain that the farm represented everything real I'd ever known, that amid the ruins of my carefully constructed life, it was the only thing that felt like a lifeline, They left frustrated, my mother kissing my cheek with that tight smile that always meant disappointment. The divorce settlement left me with half the proceeds from our Beverly Hills mansion. Not nearly what I used to be worth, but more than enough to start over somewhere, anywhere. I packed a suitcase with clothes I'd had before I became Dr. Collins, threw in some old jeans I found in the back of my closet, and loaded everything into a used Toyota 4Runner I'd bought to replace the total Porsche. The drive from California to Kentucky took 4 days. 4 days of cheap motels, roadside diners, and gas station coffee. 4 days of watching the landscape change from desert to plains to rolling hills. 4 days of my hands shaking less on the steering wheel than they had in months. When I finally arrived at the farm, it was night. I pulled up the overgrown driveway, headlights illuminating the sagging front porch of the farmhouse. The stars overhead burned so bright it hurt my eyes. I'd forgotten what real darkness looked like, how it makes the stars pop like diamonds scattered across black velvet. For the first time in years, I heard silence. Not the hum of air conditioning or the distant sound of traffic or Lauren's complaints. Just cricket song and a distant owl. The air smelled like grass and earth and possibility. Morning revealed the full state of the place. The fence was falling down in places. The barn roof needed repair, and the beehives, what was left of them, stood empty and abandoned. I walked the property slowly, my injured leg protesting, but my soul drinking in every detail. This was mine now, not the shiny, hollow life I'd built in L.A., but something real, something with roots. I slept that first night on a dusty mattress in what used to be my summer bedroom. Through the window, I could see the field where Pops had taught me to smoke the hives, his gentle voice explaining how the bees would think it was a forest fire and gorge themselves on honey instead of stinging us. In the morning light, I examined my hands. Still a tremor, but maybe not as bad as before. The local diner in town remembered me. Marge, the waitress who'd been serving pies since I was a kid, didn't even charge me for coffee. Old Mr. Henderson from the hardware store asked about Pops, shook his head sadly when I told him about the funeral. Nobody mentioned my fancy L.A. job or asked why my hands shook when I picked up my fork. They just welcomed me back like I'd never left. That evening, standing on the porch watching the sunset paint the Kentucky hills gold, I felt something stir inside me. Not regret, though there was plenty of that. Not grief, though that was fresh and raw. Something else, possibility. The farm was calling to me, broken down as it was. But where would I even begin? I stood on Pop's farm, every inch it now mine, and I had no idea what to do next. No surgical schedule to follow, no Lauren telling me where to be, no parents mapping out my next career move. Just me, some broken down beehives, and a whole lot of questions about what came next. What I didn't know then was that fate wasn't finished with me yet. Standing there among the remnants of Pop's life, I couldn't have imagined a meeting that was about to change everything again. Sometimes life's biggest turns come when you run out of road maps entirely. The morning after my arrival, I took a proper look at the farm. It reminded me of myself, beat up but still standing. The fence leaned at odd angles like a drunk trying to walk a straight line. The farmhouse smelled of old wood, dust, and memories. Only one beehive remained active, with a handful of stubborn bees buzzing around it like the last patrons of a dying bar at closing time. That first week, I slept more than I had in years. No alarm clocks, no surgery scheduled, no Lauren asking me to attend some influencer event. Just me, the crickets, and occasional nightmares about my hands never stopping their trembling dance. I found Pop's journal while cleaning out his desk, a leather-bound book filled with his distinctive handwriting. Each letter carefully formed like he was crafting something precious. Pages upon pages of wisdom, weather patterns, and life observations. One sentence hit me like a punch to the gut. Bees teach us patience. You can hurry, but you can't rush honey. I smiled despite the tears forming. Easy for you to say. Pops. With nothing but time on my hands, I started fixing things. The porch steps needed replacing, so I watched some YouTube tutorials and gave it a shot. My hands shook less when focused on manual work. I noticed I patched the roof where rain leaked through, fixed cabinet doors that wouldn't close properly, Each repair felt like I was fixing a small piece of myself, too. The locals treated me like a curiosity at first. I'd go into town for supplies, and conversations would stop when I entered the hardware store. Then Mr. Jenkins, who'd owned the place since the Nixon administration, would squint at me and ask if I was Harold Collins' grandson, the one who went California. When I'd nod, faces would soften, and stories about Pops would flow like honey from a warm comb. The town itself felt like a time capsule from the 1960s. The diner still served milkshakes in metal mixing cups, leaving you the extra portion in a glass on the side. The gas station had an actual mechanic who knew every car in town by the sound of its engine. No one was in a hurry. No one was checking their investment portfolio on their phone. People just lived. My city instincts initially rebelled. Where was the closest Whole Foods? Did anyone deliver groceries here? Could I get decent coffee within a 20-mile radius? But after 2 weeks, something shifted. I started appreciating the rhythm of small-town life. How the diner had the best pie on Thursdays, because that's when Mrs. Patterson baked. How everyone knew when rain was coming by how their joints felt. How people waved from their porches as I drove by. I was fixing the front gate one afternoon when a blue pickup truck pulled into the driveway. My first thought was that one of Pop's old friends had come to check on the place. Instead, a woman stepped out, early 30s, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Something about her seemed familiar, but I couldn't place her until she spoke. Her voice unlocked a flood of memories. Emma Taylor, the girl from the neighboring farm. My summer friend who showed me all the best fishing spots and taught me how to drive a tractor when we were 16. The same Emma I'd kissed behind the barn before heading off to college, promising to stay in touch, a promise that lasted about as long as my first semester. She'd heard I was back in town. Small-town news travels faster than Twitter, and thought she'd stop by to say hello. I was suddenly conscious of my 3-day beer and work clothes, but Emma just smiled and said I looked rustically charming, whatever that meant. We sat on the newly fixed porch steps, drinking iced tea I'd hastily made from a mix I found in Pop's pantry. Emma had become a cosmetologist in Nashville, working at an upscale salon. She was just visiting her parents for the week. As we talked, I realized how much I'd missed simple conversation. No networking, no status signaling, just two people catching up. Emma hadn't changed in the ways that mattered. Same laugh that started in her eyes before reaching her mouth. Same habit of tucking her hair behind her ear when thinking. But now there was a confidence about her that was new. She'd built a life on her own terms, not following someone else's blueprint like I had. We walked the property together, reminiscing about stealing apples from Pop's orchard and getting chased by his old dog, Rusty. I showed her the lone surviving beehive, and she reminded me how I'd once gotten stung on my backside after sitting on a bee while we were having a picnic. I'd forgotten that humiliating moment, but she remembered it with perfect clarity, still finding it hilarious 15 years later. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the overgrown fields, I found myself telling Emma everything. The accident, my trembling hands, Lauren's departure, my failed career. Words poured out of me like I was lancing an infection, painful but necessary. Emma listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions, but mostly just bearing witness to my unraveling and reassembly. When I finished, she told me about her own life in Nashville. The salon was glamorous in its way, but the constant pressure to make wealthy women look younger was wearing on her. She missed Kentucky's authenticity, how people's faces told stories instead of hiding them behind Botox and fillers. We were both thinking the same thing. We escaped to better places only to discover what we left behind was what mattered. Over the next few days, Emma kept stopping by. We'd work on the farm together. She'd hold a ladder while I cleaned gutters, or we'd team up to mend the broken sections of fence. My hands still trembled, but less when I was with her. We'd break for lunch, sitting on the porch eating sandwiches and talking about everything and nothing. One evening, we found Pop's old record player and a collection of vinyl that would make a hipster weep with joy. We played Johnny Cash and Patsy Cline, dancing in the living room like teenagers. For those few hours, I wasn't an ex-surgeon with a failed marriage and uncertain future. I was just Jake Collins, dancing with a pretty girl in an old farmhouse as twilight gathered outside. Emma knew about bees too. Her father had kept a few hives when she was growing up. We examined Pop's surviving colony together, and she pointed out the queen, a skill I'd lost along with so many other connections to this place. We stood there, shoulders touching, watching the worker bees return with pollen on their legs, and I felt more at peace than I had in a decade of high-end parties and surgical successes. I found myself wondering about possibilities I hadn't considered before. What if I stayed here? What if I restored the farm, brought back the bees? Crazy thoughts for someone who'd been sculpting celebrity noses just months earlier, yet standing next to Emma, watching bees work in perfect harmony. It didn't seem so crazy after all. On her last day before it turned to Nashville, we hiked to the creek that marked the boundary between our family properties. The water still ran clear and cool, just as I remembered. Emma took off her shoes and waded in, challenging me to do the same. The cold water shocked my system in the best possible way. I felt awake, present, alive. Looking at Emma, sunlight in her hair and water splashing around her ankles, I realized something that terrified me. I was falling for her, or maybe remembering that I'd never really stopped. But what did I have to offer? A man with trembling hands and a bank account that, while still comfortable, was a fraction of what it had been. A man still piecing himself together from the wreckage of a life that had looked perfect from the outside, but was hollow at its core. She was leaving tomorrow, heading back to her established life in Nashville. I had no right to ask her to stay, no right to complicate her world with my chaos. But watching her there in the creek, laughing as minnows dart around her feet, I knew I'd regret it forever if I didn't try. That night, I hatched a plan. If this was potentially the last evening we'd spend together, I wanted to make it special. I drove into town and bought steaks from the local butcher, fresh vegetables from the farmer's market, and a bottle of decent bourbon from the liquor store, where the owners still remember me as little Jake Collins who used to buy candy with pennies. Back at the farm, I cleaned up the porch, strung some old Christmas lights I found in the attic, and set up Pop's record player near the open window so music would drift outside. It wasn't Beverly Hills elegant, but it had heart. I even managed to shave without nicking myself despite my unsteady hands, a small victory that felt monumental. As sunset approached, I worried. What if Emma had other plans for her last night in town? What if this grand gesture fell flat? What if she saw it for what it really was, not just a friendly dinner, but something more hopeful? My phone had spotty reception at the farm. Another difference from L.A., where being unreachable for even an hour seemed like a cardinal sin. I couldn't text Emma, so I just had to hope she'd stop by like she had the past few days. I prepared the food, set the table on the porch, and waited, my heart doing gymnastics in my chest. When her truck pulled up the driveway, I nearly knocked over the bourbon in relief. She stepped out wearing a simple sundress instead of her usual jeans, her hair down around her shoulders. She'd been planning something, too, it seemed. Our eyes met across the yard, and a current passed between us that made my shaky hand seem like a minor inconvenience in the grand scheme of things. Over dinner, we talked about everything except what was really happening between us. The steak turned out better than I expected. All those cooking shows Lauren made me watch had apparently taught me something useful. Emma complimented the food, and I admitted it was my first time cooking a full meal since college. As the stars came out, so many more visible here than in L.A.'s light-polluted sky, we moved to the porch swing that I WD-40'd into submission that morning. Sitting there, the gentle creak of the chains, the chirp of crickets, and Patsy Cline singing about falling to pieces in the background, I felt a clarity I'd been missing for years. I knew that if I didn't tell Emma the truth now, I might lose her forever. But was I ready to open my heart again after Lauren had treated it like a defective product to be returned? Everything depended on this one conversation, this one evening under the Kentucky stars. What I didn't know yet was that Emma had secrets of her own, plans and dreams she hadn't shared. As we sat there on that porch swing, both of us gathering courage for what came next, the future hung in a balance, uncertain, frightening, but filled with more possibility than I'd felt in years. We sat on that porch swing under the Kentucky stars, the gentle creaking of the chains keeping time with the crickets. The moment felt suspended, like honey slowly dripping from a comb, sweet but with an inevitable conclusion. I knew it was now or never. Tomorrow, Emma would drive back to Nashville, back to her life, and this fragile connection we'd rekindled might dissolve like morning mist. My heart hammered against my ribs as I gathered my courage. The bourbon we'd been sipping provided just enough liquid bravery for what came next. I turned to face her, my hands trembling less from nerve damage now and more from plain old fear. Funny how facing the collapse of my marriage had been easier than this moment of raw honesty. I started slowly, telling Emma how returning to this farm had made me realize how hollow my life in L.A. had been, how the things I pursued, status, wealth, professional acclaim, had left me empty inside. The accident that destroyed my surgical career had seemed like the end of my world, but sitting here now, it felt more like a beginning. Then the words tumbled out faster, less practiced. I told her how seeing her again had awakened something I thought had died under the weight of my artificial life. How her smile still did the same thing to my heart it had done when we were teenagers stealing moments behind the barn. How, for the first time since the accident, I felt like my future might hold something worth building. Emma listened quietly, the porch light casting half her face in shadow. I couldn't read her expression, which only made me more nervous. I explained that I knew it was crazy. We'd reconnected for barely a week. She had a career in Nashville. I was still sorting through the wreckage of my life. But when I thought about restoring this farm, bringing back the bees, creating something real and meaningful, I couldn't imagine doing it without her. My hands were shaking as I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small box. I'd stopped at the town's only jewelry store that morning, drawn to a simple silver ring with a small amber stone that reminded me of honey. The jeweler, Mrs. Patterson, had given me a knowing smile when I purchased it, undoubtedly adding another chapter to the town gossip mill. I slid off the swing onto one knee in the weathered porch boards. This moment couldn't have been more different from my proposal to Lauren, which had been staged at Nobu, Malibu, with a photographer hiding behind a palm tree to capture the spontaneous moment for her Instagram. There was nothing calculated about this, just terrifying authenticity. The words caught in my throat at first. Looking up at Emma's surprised face, I managed to tell her that I couldn't promise her a mansion in Beverly Hills or a luxury car or exotic vacations. All I had was this rundown farm and a heart that was still learning to beat properly again. But I promised to love her the way bees love their flowers, with purpose, devotion, and the understanding that together we'd create something sweet. The seconds that followed were the longest of my life, longer than waiting for my medical school acceptance letter, longer than the moment before my first solo surgery. Emma's expression was unreadable in the dim porch light, and I braced myself for gentle rejection. After all, what woman trades a stable career for a fix-upper farm and a broken man? Then I saw tears glistening on her cheeks. For a horrible moment, I thought I'd misread everything. But she slid off the swing to kneel with me on the worn boards, taking my face in her hands. Her touch was steady while mine still trembled. What Emma told me next knocked the air from my lungs. She'd been waiting her whole life for me to come back. That she'd had relationships in Nashville, but never married because something always held her back. Now she understood what or who that something was. She'd known somehow that our paths would cross again, that I'd remember what mattered. In that moment, kneeling on the creaky porch of my grandfather's honey farm, I felt more successful than I ever had signing the lease on my Beverly Hills practice or buying a sports car with cash. This was real wealth. Finding someone who saw the best in you even when you'd lost sight of it yourself. We stayed up half the night talking, moving inside when the temperature dropped, sitting at Pop's kitchen table, the same one where he'd served me breakfast every summer morning of my youth. We mapped out possibilities on the back of an envelope. Emma's knowledge of the beauty industry dovetailed perfectly with my half-formed ideas about artisanal honey products. Her creativity sparked against my medical background, generating ideas neither of us would have conceived alone. Practical concerns emerged through the haze of happiness. Emma would need to give notice at the Nashville salon. We'd have to figure out finances. The farm needed serious work before it could be operational again. But each obstacle seemed smaller when we faced it together, like problems had solutions rather than roadblocks that defined our limits. I fell asleep that night with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. For the first time since the accident, I didn't dream of trembling hands ruining a patient's face or Lauren walking away with her designer luggage. Instead, I dreamed of beehives filled with honey and a future that tasted sweet. The next morning over coffee on the porch, Emma made the call to her salon in Nashville. I tried not to eavesdrop, giving her space as she paced the yard with her phone. When she came back, her expression was a mix of relief and trepidation. She quit, just like that. 15 years building a clientele in Nashville, gone with a phone call. She caught my concerned look and assured me she had no regrets. Said she'd grown tired of applying makeup to hide people's true selves, of the constant pressure to make everyone look like filtered versions of themselves. Here, she could be herself, no contouring required. That afternoon, we drove to her parents' farm. I hadn't seen the Taylors since high school and wasn't sure what reception to expect. Would they see me as the city boy who'd broken their daughter's heart years ago? Would they think I was crazy for proposing after a week? I needn't have worried. Mr. Taylor pumped my hand like he was trying to draw water from a deep well, while Mrs. Taylor hugged me and immediately insisted we stay for dinner. Over fried chicken and biscuits that put any LA restaurant to shame, we talked about our plans for the honey farm. To my surprise, Mr. Taylor had kept in touch with Pops over the years. They'd been friends since before I was born. He told stories about how Pops used to sell his honey at county fairs, setting up his booth at dawn and charming every customer who stopped by. According to Mr. Taylor, Pops always said good honey was like a good life. It took work, but it was worth it. After dinner, Mr. Taylor took me out to his workshop while Emma helped her mother with dishes. He showed me old equipment he had that might be useful for our beekeeping operation, a smoker in better condition than Pop's, some frames for hives, and an extractor he'd been storing since he gave up his own small apiary years ago. It was a treasure trove of practical help, but the real gift was his blessing, gruffly given as we headed back to the house. "You'll do right by her this time, city boy." The following days blurred together in a flurry of activity. Emma's few belongings from Nashville were packed into a U-Haul driven by her cousin who lived near the city. We moved her things into the master bedroom where I'd been staying. Despite how new our relationship was, it felt completely natural for us to share the same space, as if we'd been together for years instead of days. Every morning, we'd wake early and work until sunset. The tremor in my hands continued to improve with physical labor. I researched modern beekeeping methods online during evenings, learning how the industry had evolved since Pop's day. Emma designed a logo for Pop's Honey, sketching it out at the kitchen table while I read aloud from beekeeping forums. I called my parents to tell them the news. The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long I thought we'd been disconnected. My father finally asked if I was having some kind of delayed reaction to trauma. My mother wanted to know if I consulted my therapist about this drastic lifestyle change. I ended the call promising to keep in touch, but knowing the distance between us had just grown wider. Lauren found out somehow, probably through social media, since Emma had posted a picture of the farm with her amber ring visible. She texted me a series of increasingly hostile messages, culminating in her prediction that I'd come crawling back to civilization within 6 months. I didn't respond, but I did spend an hour that evening sitting on the porch steps, wondering if she might be right. Was I being naive, thinking we could succeed where even established farmers struggled? Emma found me there, 2 beers in hand, and settled beside me. Without my saying a word, she seemed to understand my doubts. She reminded me that we weren't going into this blind. She had business experience from running her salon station. I had organizational skills from managing my practice. We weren't 20-year-old kids playing farmer. We were adults with skills, some capital, and the sense to start small and grow carefully. We fixed the farmhouse roof before the first autumn rains came, repainted the exterior, choosing a warm yellow that reminded us of honey, cleared the overgrown fields where wildflowers would grow next spring to feed our future bees, ordered equipment, high bodies, and packaged bees for delivery after winter. One evening about a month after Emma moved in, we stood hand in hand watching the sunset from the repaired porch. The farm was starting to look like a working operation again instead of an abandoned property. We still had a mountain of work ahead, but for the first time, I could envision the completed picture, Beehives dotting the fields, honey being extracted in a clean processing room, customers driving up the newly graveled driveway to buy direct from the source. I felt something I hadn't experienced since before the accident. Purpose. Not the kind that comes from external validation or status symbols, but the deep satisfaction of building something meaningful with your own hands. Standing there with Emma as the last light faded from the sky, I understood what Pops had been trying to tell me all those years ago. Success wasn't measured in dollar signs or social media followers. It was measured in honest work, genuine relationships, and the courage to follow your heart even when it leads you away from what others define as achievement. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. We had limited capital for my divorce settlement, and farm life is never without challenges. Weather, pests, market fluctuations, all would test our resolve in the coming years. But as I looked at Emma in the fading light, her head resting comfortably on my shoulder, I knew we had found something most people spend their whole lives searching for, a home in each other. As if reading my thoughts, Emma squeezed my hand and pointed to the horizon where the first stars were appearing. She suggested we could put new beehives right where Pops had kept his, by the eastern field to catch the morning sun. Her confidence bolstered mine, reminding me that I wasn't doing this alone anymore. We had the farm. We had a plan. Most importantly, we had each other. Now we just needed to see if we could actually bring back Pop's famous honey and make this crazy dream work. Our adventure was only beginning, and for the first time in years, I couldn't wait to see what tomorrow would bring. Winter in Kentucky is a time of waiting. The land rests, gathering strength for spring's explosion. That first winter on the farm, Emma and I did the same. We repaired what we could inside the farmhouse, researched beekeeping techniques, and planned for our first season. When spring finally arrived, bringing wildflowers and warming temperatures, we were as ready as two city transplants could be. We started with 10 beehives, ordered from a supplier in Georgia. The day they arrived was both terrifying and exhilarating. There's something humbling about standing in a cloud of thousands of buzzing insects. Try to remember everything you learned from YouTube videos and beekeeping books. My hand shook slightly as I worked, but this time from excitement rather than nerve damage. Pops had made it look so easy during those childhood summers. Reality proved more complicated. Our first honey harvest was disappointingly bitter, with an aftertaste that made your face scrunch up like you'd bitten into a lemon. I joked that the bees must know I'm a rookie and were hazing me accordingly. Emma laughed, but I could see the worry behind her eyes. We'd invested nearly everything we had in this venture. That night, sitting on the porch with 2 jars of our bitter disappointment, I pulled out Pop's journal again. We'd read parts of it before, but now I studied it like a medical textbook, searching for solutions. Emma leaned against my shoulder, pointing out entries about flower varieties and hive locations. According to Pops, the best honey came when the hives were positioned near specific wildflower combinations and moved seasonally to follow different blooms. The next day, we loaded our hives onto a flatbed trailer and repositioned them based on Pop's notes. We planted clover, lavender, and black-eyed Susans in strategic locations. We experimented with different extraction techniques. It was scientific trial and error, but with bees as our research subjects and honey as our data points. Through that first summer, we learned the rhythms of the bees, how they became agitated before storms, how they preferred morning sun but afternoon shade, how different flowers produce subtly different flavors. Emma created a detailed spreadsheet tracking everything from weather conditions to honey color. I would have laughed at such meticulous record-keeping during my surgeon days, but now I understood that small details make all the difference. A year after our bitter first harvest, we extracted honey that made both of us go silent when we tasted it. Rich, complex, with notes of wildflowers and a finish that lingered pleasantly. It smelled like my childhood summers at the farm. We bottled it in small jars with hand-printed labels and sold it at the local farmer's market. Price higher than the commercial stuff, but lower than what I knew people paid for artisanal honey in L.A. Our booth sold out by noon. The following week, we doubled our stock and sold out again. People kept saying things like, "This tastes just like old Harold Collins honey, but maybe even better." At first, I thought they were just being kind to Pop's grandson, but the repeat customers convinced me otherwise. We were making something special. Emma was the one who saw beyond local markets. She contacted former clients from her Nashville salon days, upscale beauty boutiques where she'd done makeup for special events. She sent them samples of our honey paired with a pitch about natural beauty products. Her background in cosmetics gave her the language to explain why raw honey, beeswax, and propolis were gold mines for skincare. 3 small brands placed orders for our raw materials. They wanted our honey and beeswax for lip balms and face masks. It wasn't much, but it was a foothold in a completely different market. We named our company Pop's Honey in grandfather's honor, with a simple logo Emma designed featuring a vintage-style bee. The path forward wasn't without thorns. Taking out our first business loan felt like jumping out of an airplane, hoping the parachute would open. My hand shook signing those papers, not from nerve damage, but from fear. What if we failed? What if the next season's honey went back to being bitter? What if we lost a farm? Emma squeezed my shoulder and reminded me that fear and flying feel remarkably similar. It's all in how you frame the experience. Hiring our first employees meant we weren't just responsible for ourselves anymore. Local kids looking for summer work, a retired biology teacher who knew more about bees than both of us combined, a former factory worker who turned out to be mechanically brilliant at fixing our equipment. Each new person added complexity, but also strength to our operation. Year 2 brought expansion of 50 hives and our first dedicated processing facility, just a converted barn with stainless steel equipment, but officially inspected and approved. We added honey varieties, wildflower, clover, buckwheat. Our skincare line started with simple beeswax lip balms and honey face masks that Emma formulated in our kitchen. By the end of our second year, I noticed something strange. My hands had completely stopped trembling, not just occasionally, but altogether. The regular physical work, the focus on delicate beekeeping tasks, the absence of high-pressure surgeries. Something had healed what doctors in L.A. had said might be permanent. Looking at my steady hands one evening, I thought that honey truly does heal more than just physical ailments. It heals the soul, too. Year 3 saw us expand over 500 hives and hire a full-time staff of 12 local workers. Our honey was now sold in specialty food stores across 5 states. The skincare line had grown to include royal jelly creams, propolis tinctures, and honey cleansers. Emma's connections in the beauty industry proved invaluable as word spread about our farm-to-face approach. I'll never forget the day a buyer from Whole Foods called. At first, I thought it was a prank, possibly Lauren or one of my former colleagues messing with me. But the offer was real. They wanted Pop's Honey on shelves in their Southeast region stores. The minimum order quantity was more than we'd produced in our entire previous year. Emma and I stayed up all night recalculating everything from production capacity to cash flow projections. Taking Whole Foods' contract meant another loan, more hives, more equipment, more staff. The stakes were higher than any surgery I'd ever performed, but the potential reward was greater too, not just financially, but in terms of honoring Pop's legacy and building something lasting. We signed the papers, ordered equipment, and hired 6 more people from the local community. Meanwhile, beauty brands from New York and Los Angeles began contacting us about wholesale ingredients. A particularly surreal moment came when a skincare company whose products Lauren used to swear by reached out wanting our propolis for their new natural luxury line. The irony wasn't lost on me. My new life was literally becoming an ingredient in my old one. Year 3 turned out to be our breakthrough. Pop's Honey became a name known across America in both gourmet food circles and natural skincare communities. Online sales exploded after a popular cooking blogger featured our buckwheat honey in a viral recipe post. Emma appeared on regional morning shows demonstrating DIY honey facials. We expanded again, this time to over 1,000 hives. We built a modern production facility right on the farm property, combining the latest in food processing technology with the traditional methods Pops had used. I often thought about how he would react seeing the stainless steel tanks and automated bottling equipment operating alongside his old hand extractor that we kept as both a functional antique and a reminder of our roots. By the end of year 4, I was wealthier than I'd ever been as a surgeon. Our company valuation exceeded anything I could have imagined when we started. Banks that had reluctantly approved our initial loans now called offering lines of credit. Investors sent emails asking if we considered taking on partners or even going public someday. But the true richness wasn't in our bank accounts. It was in a large farmhouse we'd built where the original had stood, incorporating wood from Pop's home into the new construction. It was in our relationship that had deepened through shared challenges and triumphs. It was in the community we created. 35 full-time employees from the surrounding area, many of whom had previously struggled to find work in the declining rural economy. Major cosmetics companies came calling, wanting exclusive contracts for our raw ingredients. After careful consideration and long nights discussing pros and cons, we signed agreements with select partners who align with our values of sustainability and quality. Pop's Honey became one of the largest beekeeping operations in the region, but we maintain our commitment to traditional methods and quality over mass production. We married in the summer of our 5th year on the farm. The ceremony was everything a Beverly Hills wedding isn't: authentic, unpretentious, joyful. We exchanged vows under the old magnolia tree near the original beehives. Emma wore wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Our employees sat alongside family and friends. The cake, of course, featured layers of honey buttercream, and every table centerpiece incorporated beeswax candles we'd made ourselves. My parents attended, looking slightly out of place but genuinely moved. My father, the cardiologist who'd once dismissed farming as a career for losers, embraced me with tears in his eyes, admitting they'd been wrong. They could see what I'd built was more meaningful than the hollow success I'd chased in California. Their approval shouldn't have mattered anymore, but I found it healing nonetheless. A week after the wedding, Lauren sent a direct message on Instagram. She was dating a tech CEO now, living in San Francisco, but was in the area and wondered if we could meet for coffee. I showed the message to Emma, who raised an eyebrow, but said she trusted me completely. I replied to Lauren simply, "My heart is fully occupied with bees and Emma." It wasn't meant to be cruel, just honest. I never heard from her again. As our business grew, we made sure to give back to the community that had welcomed us. We established scholarships for local students interested in sustainable agriculture or entrepreneurship. We donated honey to food banks and school lunch programs. We hosted educational tours for kids, teaching them about pollination and environmental stewardship. Emma became pregnant in our 6th year on the farm. Standing in our bedroom looking at the positive test, I felt a completeness I'd never known possible. We were creating not just honey and products, but a legacy, something to pass down to the next generation, something with roots deeper than any accomplishment I'd achieved in my previous life. The media eventually found us, a feel-good story about a former Beverly Hills surgeon who found greater success making honey in Kentucky. A national morning show did a segment. A glossy magazine did a spread on our rustic chic farmhouse and production facilities. Social media influencers posted about their Pop's Honey experience after visiting our farm store and spa, which Emma had opened as our newest venture. None of the attention changed how we operated. We remained focused on quality and sustainability, refusing to cut corners even as we scaled up. When a multinational food corporation offered to buy us out for a figure that made my head spin, Emma and I didn't even need to discuss it before declining. This wasn't just a business to sell. It was our life's work. In quiet moments, standing among the beehives at sunset, watching workers return with pollen-laden legs, I often think about Pops, about how he tried to show me what mattered when I was young, and how it took losing everything to finally understand. I think about his words, written in that journal. Life is like a beehive. Each day is a small drop of honey. At the time, it had seemed like simple rural philosophy. Now I recognize it as profound wisdom. True success isn't measured in dollars, though we have plenty. It's not counted in social media followers or magazine features, though we've accumulated those too. Real success is in finding yourself, finding love, and building something that lives beyond you, something that connects you to the earth and to other people, something that makes the world a little sweeter. Emma and I plan to eventually pass the farm and business to our children, ensuring that Pop's wisdom continues to hum through generations. I sometimes imagine him watching us, nodding in approval as we tend the bees he loved so much. In my mind, he's always saying the same thing. I knew you'd remember who you are, boy. I knew you'd come home. The most remarkable part of this journey is that losing my perfect life was the best thing that ever happened to me. That accident that ended my surgical career opened the door to something authentic. Those trembling hands that couldn't hold a scalpel steady became perfectly capable of building a different kind of life. One measured not in procedures completed or celebrity satisfied, but in seasons witnessed, relationships nurtured, and small, daily joys accumulated like honey, drop by golden drop.